Hello and good morning. This is Enrico Imanalo here with a very special guest today, Waidehi Gokhale, the CEO of Soliya. Soliya is a virtual exchange that has a number of programs, and in full transparency, I am actually an alumnus of their facilitation program. And it's been a very important part of building the skills that I need to be a conflict practitioner. There's also the Connect program, which brings together people from different parts of the world in order to have dialogues, and that's what the facilitators do for Soliya. To give you a sense of what exactly we mean by a virtual exchange, we've got an image here of the technology in action. So I don't know if we can see that quickly before we introduce our guest further. Well, as that's happening, we'll transition to you, Waidehi. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, Rika. Thank you to you and all ACEs for having us on here. I'm really excited to chat about the work that we do at Soliya. As you mentioned, what we call it's called virtual exchange, which has now become kind of a pretty buoyant and vibrant field of its own. And essentially what it means is you use some form of technology. We happen to use our own, which you just saw flashed up there, called the Exchange Portal. And so the idea is to create the notion of sitting around in a circle, having an intimate, but safe dialogue space. And so the dialogue happens in small groups of about 8 to 12. And as you mentioned, it's global. Most of our dialogue programming is global. And the folks who are kind of in there to help ensure the security and efficiency of the dialogue process are the facilitators, which you also mentioned, whom we also train.
It's really important for people to understand that using this technology is not something that emerged in response to the pandemic that we're still in, but actually has been part of the process from the beginning. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the founder of Soliya was sort of, you have to kind of use the term visionary, really, in an era before social media, before video conferencing, before Skype. He was convinced that there was the potential for technology to be a really powerful vehicle to bring people together in a quite a deliberate way, not in the way that social media ended up doing it. So we've been using video conferencing technology for 17 years. So the moment of the pandemic for us was interesting because in many ways it was that phrase, keep calm and carry on being Soliya. We were just able to keep going with all our work.
I have to say, I've really found my time with Soliya invaluable, especially that technology piece, because when our team on all ACEs decided to go completely remote, I was already prepared to do that.
Right.
And not to toot the horn too much, but the facilitation program is really, really robust. It's kind of unbelievable how well developed the materials are to train people. And if I'm being, again, quite honest, I've taken a lot of those lessons and applied them directly to our work. So thank you to Soliya for that one.
Thank you, Rico.
And so you're now the CEO of Soliya, but you didn't start out there. So how did you get involved? How did you go from wherever you were coming from to CEO?
I sometimes still trip over that title, to be honest. My journey kind of, maybe I'll give you sort of two layers to that. So the personal piece of it and then the professional piece of it. So the personal piece of it links to kind of why this kind of work, right? Why was I drawn to this kind of work? And then the professional is more just the journey in. And so the personal piece of it, I wasn't really a kid who knew what I wanted to do early or had kind of a really evident talent that, told me what I was going to do. So, if you asked me at 8, I wanted to be a firefighter. At 10, I wanted to be a vet. At 12, maybe the Secretary General of the UN. No need to not be ambitious.
Yeah.
But the one thing that was always kind of a thread for me was I was always super curious and interested in people. And most specifically, people and their reaction. So 2 things. One, what I call the why of people. So how come you are the way you are? Or how come you think the way you think, right? And then layered onto that was this curiosity around the fact that I always observed that when people were faced with something that they thought of as being different or other, there was almost always a lean out. There was, it's always, you always observed fear or suspicion or kind of a disengagement, and I always found that fascinating. And maybe it's because I spent time being the different one, in different spaces because of where and how I grew up.
Same.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and I've had, the opportunity to kind of live and work and learn in a variety of countries, across a variety of continents. So I've played that role. And I've had the conversation so many times with people where, the sentiment that's expressed is the reason people feel they can have an engagement with me in that moment is because they don't think of me as different. Literally those words being used. Do you know what I mean?
That's happened to me as well. And I know it was well-intentioned. And right. I really think that this was more of a function of not having the right language. But one of my friends said to me while growing up, and they really did mean to just be relational with me. They were saying, like, Rico, you know what? I forget that you're not white sometimes. And it's like, wow, there's a lot to unpack there.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. And the first time someone says that to you, it's what you say, where you're not sure why you're having a reaction or what your reaction should be. But I remember a really seminal conversation and recognizing that I was having a reaction and then wanting to unpack that for myself, right? Thinking about why and what would I rather have heard? And then fast forward, many years as a mother and my young kid who's biracial and generally sort of very delighted to travel and go places and very attached to the notion that she's half Indian. And we traveled, we usually, pandemic notwithstanding, we usually travel every year to visit family, and she loves doing that. And we came back from one of those trips, and she had collected over the period of the trip, different things, trinkets and toys and, gifts and what have you. And she was packing them into her school bag to go to kindergarten. And I said, Baba, this is great. Off you go. Your friends will be so pleased to see all this fun stuff that you're bringing to show them. And she stopped and she gasped and she said, I'm not going to show my friends. Oh. And I said, hang on, who are you going to show? She said, my teacher. And I said, well, why wouldn't you show your friends? And she said, because then they'll think I'm different.
Whoa, my God. Yeah. Wow.
And to me, that's really, so intrinsically linked to Soliya and the work that we do. And so my kind of professional journey was a little, meandering. I started off after college and kind of trained as an ESL teacher. And then
same.
I know we have that in common. And then this kind of interest in people that I talked about, academically speaking, I think it translated in my mind to an interest in psychology. Yeah. And so that's what I pursued in grad school. Mm-hmm. And then
so I just want to break in for a second, because I also started the journey that led me here as an ESL teacher, because I was really finding that more than language, I was helping people think through issues because they were learning the language as a means of achieving their goals. right? So there's that cultural navigation piece. And then the more that I delved into it is like, oh, what I'm actually interested in is figuring out how to help people move beyond their stuff and to become better people. And in the process, I get to become better as well.
Exactly. It's the journeys, right?
Yeah.
And it's the mutual piece of that you mentioned. That's what's so amazing about it. So psychology led me to working in schools, in high schools specifically, which was really interesting. And I was in public education systems in Massachusetts. But the itch for something where I was able to work in an international sphere or a more broadly cross-cultural sphere was still there. Mm-hmm. So I went back to grad school. And it was when I was there that I met the founders of Soliya right as they were creating it.
Wow.
And I just was so compelled by what they were telling me they wanted to do. You know, this idea that if you can ensure that people who wouldn't otherwise have the chance to or choose to get to meet and have a meaningful experience of engaging with one another, then you can create the possibility that people are much less inclined to dehumanize one another, are much more inclined to think of difference as a quality rather than something to be afraid of. And that was connected to my core, you know, so when I heard about them, I said, I'll volunteer, I'll do whatever you want. And so I did. I trained as a facilitator, and then I did that while I, finished graduate school, and then I got a day job in what would be seen as more kind of traditional development work, conflict resolution work, which I loved. But I used to joke with my partner all the time, ideally, I just get to work with Soliya. And then in I guess in 2007. They were hiring for a program manager position, and I threw my hat in the ring, and here I am.
So, because we are both facilitators, mediators, and conflict resolution people, now's the time when I summarize and reflect back to you. So what you're saying to me, Waidehi, is that dreams do come true? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's right. If you find a place, you hold on, and eventually they'll hand you the key.
Oh, but that's a really fantastic journey. And thank you for sharing that with us. One thing that I would love to return to, if it's all right, and I don't want to dip into the theoretical too much here, but that story that you told about your daughter, there's so much in that. And one of the things that conflict resolution practitioners learn about is that, and this is one of the foundations of our field, is that even the way that the human brain has evolved, even the suggestion of difference is enough to what we call other people, which means, it's another way of saying dehumanize people. It is shocking how quickly that happens. And if it happened for a little girl who was going into kindergarten, I think that really just underscores the point.
Yeah. Yeah. It tells us that there's a lot of work to do. Because the thing is, because even as you say, even the very suggestion of difference causes that lean out, as I said, the script that we function on right now as humanity is that is the exact thing that gets manipulated.
Yes.
Right? So our fear of difference gets manipulated, and that manipulation means that you can so easily entrench silos and, put people apart and biases and stereotypes and so on. And with that, you perpetuate conflict.
Right.
But if you can make it that you have a whole generation of people who, when they view difference, they think of it as, okay, I feel like I want to engage with this and I know how to. And that could be a difficult conversation. It could be, curiosity about something you know nothing about. but to make that decision to do the journey, right?
Yeah.
And so we say that a lot at Soliya, this idea of what does it really mean to bring people together in dialogue? What does that mean? What does it mean to excavate difference, right? And one of our core principles is the hope in our dialogue groups, as you will have experienced yourself through our facilitation model, is you're trying not to create an environment where everybody tries to find that one common thread that they can hold hands around. What you're actually trying to do is making it okay for people to ask hard questions, to say things, to say, well, my grandmother always told me X, Y, Z, and then to have someone bring that back and say, oh, so that's why you believe what you do, and here, let me tell you what my grandma told, and there is so much power in that journey. And there's such a commitment there. The commitment is, I'm going to explore my why. And then as part of dialogue, the big thing that you do is listen, right? And so
I'm the main thing, right?
And I'm going to listen to your journey, and then we're going to do something about it together.
But also, we're listening to ourselves. We're building the capacity to listen to ourselves, and I think it's worth making it very obvious that we are not talking about good people do this and bad people do that. It's not about right and wrong. It's about being human and understanding in much greater depth what that means and how we can relate to each other.
Exactly. That's the thing with dialogue, and the spaces that we want to provide are very much not a binary, right? So if you hold what someone else deems a radical belief, these should be the spaces where you can explore those. But what we've learned over and over again is when you are doing that exploration and thinking about the why, when you hear my belief, you don't just hear it as a statement, you hear it as a journey. You hear the story behind it, right? Yeah. And while I'm exploring, well, I believe this because my grandma always said, right? Or whatever it is. I don't mean to blame grandmothers here, but I'm just saying or what you watch on the news or what you read in the media, whatever it is, as you unpack that, that's when you see where the holes are. Wait a minute, hang on. What if I pressure test this a little bit? And it's again not about someone winning or losing. This is 100% not zero sum. This is about creating more opportunity. Right. Understanding the wide variety of options that are available for us to think and believe and hold on to.
One really powerful experience for me as a facilitator and for my co-facilitator as well, we had a gentleman who was a student, but a little bit older, and he described himself very much, his words, not mine, as a redneck he was putting forth that he thinks about things a certain way and believes things are a certain way. And at the very beginning, his body language was always like this. And by the end of it, he was getting really curious, and he was just always chatting with people, and you could see his curiosity had been ignited. And the more that he just talked to the other people, mostly from Morocco at that point, he started to find all these confluences, all these things that they actually had in common. And it was incredible. I don't think it would serve the Connect program well to necessarily record these things and stream them or whatever. But there's the point I'm trying to get at is this program has been going on for 17 years, and there are so many experiences that I think, I wish that people would share them more often because they are very powerful. Yeah. So one question that I do want to get to is, well, you've been doing this for a while. So what are some things that you've learned in the course of your involvement with Soliya? because it can't be the same program as it was when you started, right?
Right, very much so. So when it first started, the kind of regions that the founders were interested in, or the relationship that they felt they were trying to, tackle, if you like, was the one between the United States and the Middle East and North Africa, so roughly the Arab region, if you like.
Sure.
But quite quickly, as we started doing this work, it became apparent that the kinds of skills and shifts that we were seeing in young people who were taking part in the dialogue program were relevant really to all youth everywhere. I mean, it was really relevant across so many lines of difference, across so many geographies, communities, etc. So we expanded our geographic footprint. We played with the model endlessly. So, how many weeks and for how long and how structured and how not structured, and do we do it thematically and do we not? And a lot of what we did was listen to the participants, to the partners, to understand the relevance, the framing, all that kind of thing. And so, I would definitely say we've evolved the model. But the organization was really built on some very core principles and values around respect, around diversity, around the notion of kind of excellence of experience. So when you're trying to run or grow a not-for-profit, there's often a lot of emphasis on, well, how big can you get?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, but as you mentioned several times, Soliya is global, right? And just to give people a sense of what that means, maybe we can show the map that you've provided.
Yeah.
And
sure.
Yeah. So like when we're talking global, like that's the globe.
Yeah, that's not bad when you think global. Yeah. So the bright orange are the places where the participants for the Connect program come from, and the two combined are the reach of the facilitation training program. So yeah, and so there can be a pressure to talk about, well, how many are you reaching, and get bigger. But one of the things that the team has always been committed to is the quality of each person's experience. And that's really important because you're committing to everybody's journey, right? If you're saying everybody needs to take this journey, then you have to make sure that each person gets as good a journey as they possibly can out of it, as powerful, good may be the wrong word. So we've definitely committed to that. In terms of kind of what we've learned, there are some pretty predictable things. So one thing is technology is always going to give you a run for your money. It's never going to be 100% easy with using technology. But on the flip side of that is that somehow technology provides an added element of bravery. So you know what I mean? Like I can say, I'm going to be a little braver in what I dare to say to you because I can't actually touch you, which is interesting. And the fact that the same group of young people meets over a period of time means that, you're going through a process. You're going through the process of getting to know each other, respecting, engaging, getting braver with each other. So those things are a given. The other thing that's a given is, particularly when you're doing it as international work, anytime something happens in the world, it's going to get discussed because there's someone from somewhere who's living that experience, And in that sense, the pandemic's been really interesting. Because,
I can only imagine.
Yeah. So you've got, 4,000 young people going through dialogue right as every single one of them has been told to stay home.
Yeah. I mean, at a time in their lives when they're at their maybe most sociable, right?
Exactly.
That's really, I really, I'm a little embarrassed. I didn't even really think about that. But
And obviously the past few months have also shed light on challenges. So inequity in terms of access to internet, how do, as higher education went into a bit of a tailspin in terms of how people were going to conduct their semesters and all that kind of thing. So what's happened now is, everybody's doing everything online. But I think that what people will now understand is doing things online that create actual interactive engagement, that create this sort of space for journey is not easy. And and you have to be really deliberate, and you have to design it really well. And the facilitators, they are the key to this.
Absolutely. It does strike me though, and I'm a little bit rusty here, but there is that strong core of principles, right, that I think really serves the mission. And again, this is the one that's really stuck with me is it's like making sure that there's constructive engagement, right? And I'm forgetting the other two, but I think there's a slide for that as well, right? It's constructive engagement.
It's about dealing with emotions in an online space and creating empathy.
Yes. Yeah. So I think you're right. One thing that may be interesting for people who are involved in the facilitation world is one thing that technology does allow us to do is we can do private chats in real time, especially if you have a really good co-facilitator. And from my own experience, sometimes there's somebody who you can tell really wants to say something, but if it was in an actual physical space, you might not be able to send them a private chat just to let them know, like, hey, I'm supporting you if you need it, And honestly, that little bit can change the entire experience for somebody. Like I've had somebody in my group go from saying nothing to saying a couple things to being a person where I had to be like, okay, and now we need to make
give someone else the chance. And that to me is about the arc that we've kind of created. The pedagogy behind what we do. You accept that this journeying takes time. And you accept that the only way people will really commit to this journey is if they feel that they own it. And that's why one of the principles of the facilitation is creating ownership and autonomy for the group, right? And then the other principle that we hold very dear is this idea of multipartiality.
So a lot of people think of, when they think facilitators, mediators, dialogue, the word neutrality kind of pops out. So what is the difference between neutrality and multipartiality?
I wish that either my colleagues Rafael or Katya were here, because they would do this much better than me. But yeah, so look, I mean, in my opinion, as a human being, you can't really be neutral. It's very difficult to do that.
I don't know how to be neutral.
Yeah, exactly. It's very hard. And so what we talk about is multipartiality, which means that you as a facilitator are there to enable all voices to come to the table. And so that's about, watching the pulse of the space, ensuring that, people who may be presenting more provocative ideas are able to do so, reminding people about the ground rules, ensuring that people are feeling that sense of ownership. But it goes back to what we were talking about, which is this is not good and bad. Right. This is not a binary, right? This is about all opportunities and options. And so that means all voices. So that's how we kind of lean into that multipartiality thing. Now, it does become tricky because when you're setting those ground rules, you're also setting your red lines, right? Because there are certain things where it's not about neutrality or multipartiality. It's some things are a red line, and as a facilitator, that can be a bit hard. How do you manage that red line? And that's why we really push on the co-creation of those ground rules and kind of collaborative commitment to the process of the dialogue, because then you can call on that. You can be like, wait, hang on, remember our own ground rule, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so maybe we can make this really clear for people, but when we're talking about red lines, like, we can't give examples from participants, but like, what would be an example of a red line?
Well, if I made a statement that was clearly kind of an attack singular to one person, if I was suggesting violence, if I was using language that is, understood as violent and transgressionary language, those are the moments where those red lines have to get pulled, right? And so it's what's interesting about the work, the way we model the programs, is that as a facilitator, and you could speak to this for sure, but you guys do the journey too.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
The whole point of the training is that understanding your own biases, stereotypes, triggers, because in order to maintain multipartiality, you've really got to have tapped into what's going to trigger me. What are my moments going to be,
Yeah, and I remember we were told explicitly to have those conversations with our co-facilitators.
Mm-hmm.
And I do very much remember feeling very nervous about it, actually, because my co-facilitator, a wonderful woman named Anka Gliga, who is originally from Turkey. I just knew from my ESL experience that there were going to be cultural differences, and I just didn't know how she was going to receive that. But as we were kind of building our capacity to depend on one another, all of that just became a lot easier for us to handle between each other and for our group. Of course, I should make sure to mention that we were facilitating, again, students who are from Muslim majority nations, and mostly those who are from the US. And I think that's an important space, particularly given recent history. But there might be people who are wondering right now. And I think we got a comment actually about that, asking us like how the Connect program or the facilitation program, having dialogues in general, might be useful for say dynamics that we're seeing occur in real time in 2020.
Yeah. So it's an interesting kind of question, and it's one we grappled with a lot as an organization. Again, going back to the idea that you're small, there's only so much you can do as an organization. So we put our stakes in the ground around the demographics that we were going to be working with. And so one of them is, the participants in the dialogue program are 18 plus. Yeah. And the facilitation training is much broader. I mean, that's, any individual, any place, anywhere. But then
with internet, right?
Pardon me, with internet, because it all happens online. In terms of our geographies, so, we've got the United States and Canada, Europe, the Middle East and North Africa, and then we've got South and Southeast Asia. And we kind of made a commitment that this is kind of who we are, and these are the realms that we're gonna be sticking to. But the applicability of a dialogue process is limitless, right? And then if you tap into the fact that there's technology added in, hopefully all the more.
Yes. So we had a question from Caitlin about what's called cancel culture. So to unpack that a little bit, cancel culture is, I don't know how I'd exactly explain it, but it's like when somebody does something deemed wrong by the quote unquote woke crowd, then there's great demand or pressure through social media, usually, for that person who is the target of the canceling, just to be like completely destroyed or obliterated, have whatever possible taken away from them. Yeah. So the question is really getting at, how is this cancel culture or the culture of wokeness impacting the group processes? Because there are, American college students who belong to this kind of woke culture that are participating in the Soliya Connect program, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So it definitely plays out within the international realm as well. We've always seen that kind of concentric circles where, kids from different parts of the same country are having exposure to one another for the very first time.
Oh, wow.
And this happens across the world. But more than that, I would say, and it goes back to the previous question, which is how does this play out in the current context here? Yeah. And so having, decided that this was our demographic, we were approached by a partner who'd been embedding the Connect program in curriculum on their campus here in the United States, and had seen very successful results from the program, and came to us and said, the thing that we're actually struggling with is social cohesion on our campus. Here within the current context of the United States, and it goes to exactly what you talk about in terms of the notion of cancel culture versus wokeness, and all of what that entails. And so together we started to design a domestic dialogue program, which we launched this past summer. It's called First Year Connect. And the idea is that when what we learned was when students were being accepted or had confirmed that they were going to attend a certain university or school or college here in the United States, what was happening was they would go onto social media and organically they would seek each other out. But they would seek each other out along very predictable tribe lines, right? The athletes would seek out the athletes, the thests, and so on and so forth. And so we thought, well, what we've learned through the Connect program is if you're bringing together people who wouldn't otherwise choose to, or otherwise have the opportunity to meet, that's where the magic happens. That's where you're truly creating space for journey and learning. And so we talked to the campus about what would it mean to create those groups across those expected lines of tribe, such that when the students come to campus or when they become a community officially in the fall, they have met someone who they wouldn't necessarily gravitate towards, and we feel very strongly that tribes are important, they're inevitable, and that people will still get to campus and hang out with those who they would want to hang out with. But what if we could create those walls to be a little less impenetrable, right? And so when something happens, someone from the athletic department, let's say there's some kind of fracas, right? A musician and an athlete, just making it up. But what if, hopefully, if First Year Connect has done its job, then someone from one camp will say, actually, I met this guy during First Year Connect. Maybe we should talk to him before we, jump on a bandwagon, throw a rock, whatever it is. And so we piloted this summer. Now, transparently, I will say, the program wasn't designed to be specifically race dialogue. But it's 2020, and we were piloting post the murder of George Floyd. And so we became very aware that, in fact, when you talk about social cohesion on a campus, when you talk about things like cancel culture and wokeness, really the core element of this right now for us here is going to be race.
So it does also sound like the design of the First Year Connect program is trying to mitigate what, sometimes people call echo chambers. And not just like online echo chambers, but social echo chambers, which let's be real, those also do exist.
Very much so.
Yeah.
I think when social media came about, and when people were kind of thinking about what this could do, there was an assumption that if you could provide a way for people to connect to each other, that they would choose to.
The if you build it, they will come model.
Right, exactly. And I think it goes back to the two things we talked about, which is this notion of fear and how it gets manipulated. And then you add that to the fact that in a social media space, there's still a level of anonymity
There it is.
I can get or like a comment section of anything at this point. And people just feel emboldened.
Yeah.
And they have absolutely stripped whoever they're talking to of their humanity. There's no connection being made there. And so our learning was, can technology be used to truly create human connection? Yes. But it has to be super deliberate, super intentional, and it takes work. It's hard.
Yeah. Well, so part of that super deliberate, super intentional thing that I don't think we've touched on yet is that Soliya actually does it really tries to make the point that media literacy is an important thing, right? We mentioned earlier that often things that happen in the news get talked about in the course of Soliya, right? So, well, of course, we are again in 2020, and we are seeing that media literacy wholesale is like not really well developed across our country. So maybe we can talk about the skills that Soliya helps both facilitators and participants to develop.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we live in an odd time, right? Where, back in the day, now I sound like my grandma, but there was a time.
Did your grandma say back in the day?
Yeah, totally. No, she never would. There was a time when if in order to make news happen, it was quite a process. You had to, that had to be print or a camera that was manned by someone else or whatever it is, but we live in a time when anyone can author anything and make it globally available.
Instantly, right?
Instantly, right. And so the onus on each of us to be responsible creators and consumers of content has never been more prevalent, right? And again, going back to this whole kernel of manipulation, it's also the thing that's so easy to manipulate. And so, yes, as part of the Connect program, we also have this conversation. The students who go through the program will sometimes also do joint projects. These projects change, but one of the ones that we've done in the past is to provide footage, the same footage to everybody, and then to give you like a storyline, and for you to create something. And the exploration is bias, right? How do you word it? What music do you use? What happens next? What story are you trying to tell? And I've never seen more aha moments, to be honest, where people, when they share back what they created, how much they recognize their biases and what they're trying to, have the viewer think. So yeah, and I think also media literacy for sure, but also responsible citizenship in the digital space. So one of the things that participants and facilitators are learning to do is this notion of discourse, right? And how you have this kind of discourse dialogue, how you keep it effective and efficient and positive. But what we're hoping and we're learning is that should also then translate into how you engage in the flat digital space. So in the social media space, the asynchronous space, right? Let's keep those principles of engagement alive.
So just so we can make this very, very, very clear for everybody. Well, a couple things. So one, dialogue that we're talking about, this is not just a conversation, right? Clearly there's facilitators involved, but what exactly are the goals of facilitation? And, there's people that know a little bit about dialogue might be saying right now, like, well, but dialogue is not action. So how do we go from dialogue to doing something?
Yeah, I think those are really, really good questions and ones that we've asked ourselves endlessly. And so, so the goals of the program are kind of multi-layered. So we want to be able to create an environment that allows people to build empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can build empathy, if you can create this lens through which you then intentionally practice, right? So this lens through which you then choose to make your decisions, your choices, how you engage with people. I think empathy gets a bad rap as like, well, it's like a tree huggy concept that,
Right.
you can throw out.
And something.
Yeah. And we think quite the opposite. We think it's quite hard, actually. And if we are going to do it, we have to actively commit to doing that. And so, and this journey that we talked about earlier, this like, my why, your why, that's all practicing empathy, right? And then the other piece of it is critical thinking. And that ties into the media stuff we were talking about. That ties into, again, the exploration of why do I think what I think? Why do you think what you think? So to build empathy, to build critical thinking skills, and then some of the other skills that, even pre-pandemic, we believed were kind of essential hard skills for the future, which is communication across lines of difference, using technology, taking leadership in a process, right? And so the dialogue element of it, I think that, again, dialogue also gets a bad rap where people are like, well, you're just having a conversation.
Right.
But
talk is cheap kind of thing.
Yeah. And what does it do in the end? Right. And so this is where I get a little kind of philosophical about it, where I say, okay, here's the way I think of it. So these are much more than conversations. These are committed experiences, right, that you're having. And your commitment is to that notion of let's not make difference something that we either sweep under the rug or pretend doesn't exist. Let's instead think about it as an opportunity and think about the full potential of what it means to engage constructively with difference, right? If we can do that, I feel like then you go to a place where, okay, what if all people did that? What if everybody committed to thinking about things through a lens of empathy? And that doesn't mean just being nice to each other, not at all. That, it's hard to be making decisions through a lens of empathy. But what if we all did that? Then can't you extrapolate and say, well, what's a system? Why is the world so broken? Because systemic, you name it, has occurred and has been entrenched for millennia, right?
Yeah.
But what is a system? A system is just a bunch of people.
Yeah, basically.
Right? Who did it? Who created it? And who's perpetuating it? It's a person.
Yeah.
So if you can sow this into all people, then surely, eventually, we change the system.
And just to ground this in an example, before the show, I was sharing that a friend of mine had come out to me very recently as gender fluid. And I mentioned that I had had a feeling like an emotional reaction to that. And I didn't really understand it or take the time to think about it until later. And this gets to the point about practicing empathy being difficult. It would have been very easy for me to dismiss what my friend had said or to avoid it because I was uncomfortable with it. But because, I've been working at empathy and engaging in dialogue and all of these things for years now, I was able to kind of identify for myself, the reason I'm feeling uncomfortable is because I'm realizing I have to change my behavior. And then I had to analyze that. And ultimately, I had to come to the conclusion, like, yeah, that would be pretty messed up of me if this is actually my friend to walk around carrying that in my relationship with them. And so, fortunately, I've been able to build up my skills enough that I was able to identify it and then say, okay, I've identified that this is not a great thing. This is going over here into the, you can't see, there's a garbage can over here. But yeah, I think there are a lot of things that people assume that they are good at or that they know. But the great thing about dialogue is it actually creates the space for you to hit pause for a second and process things.
Very much so.
Obvious.
Very much so. And I think that, so many times we'll get told, particularly if you think about the facilitation training, because it's often, people who are already in careers or at graduate school or something like that. And we get told over and over again, people who say, well, I've been doing this for a really long time. I didn't think I had anything more to learn, and yet somehow you go through this training program and everyone comes out the other end saying, wait, I learned, which is excellent. And the thing with, to go back to your point about empathy, which I think is, so the way I talk about it is, let's say you stub your toe. Mm-hmm. And then later in the day, you see someone who's wearing like one of those boots, that tells you that their foot hurts. And it's really easy in that moment to think, ooh, I feel your pain. Like I feel instant empathy for you, right? Mm-hmm. What's much harder is when you're trying to think through someone else's situation who is, again, it's the D word, who is in your mind different to you in one way or the other. And for some reason in your mind, in whatever way that you're different is an affront to you, is a problem, right?
It violates some kind of expectation or something.
This is not, to simplify it down to its, bottom line. It's like, oh, here's a person who I don't really like very much.
Yeah.
But they are going through something that I'm watching them go through. Now, activating your lens of empathy in that moment is way harder. And that's what I think we all need to be able to do.
I mean, I'm so encouraged because I love the idea that the first year Connect begins before students actually go to university. Mm-hmm. For those of us who have gone through the American university and college system, there's a huge gap between high school and that first year. And a common complaint of university instructors is that the students simply aren't ready. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I am encouraged. We did also get a question about, well, it was more of a statement. It was like, would love to see this program expand into South America. I know there's plans for, Latin America. Yeah. So there are plans to expand the domestic program as well right now, but I don't know, are there future plans for expansion on the horizon?
So this is a question we get all the time, and Joe, who asked the question, hi Joe, I really appreciate that. I really appreciate the fact that people from our community, because the community is so global, often come to us and say, why can't we expand to XYZ geography? And the reason behind it actually is a bit boring, which is just capacity. Like I said to you, we recognize its applicability 100%. It's more just, can we do it ourselves at the size that we are? Not yet. And so do we rule out the whole global thing, down the line? No. But we've just, put a pin in the ground to say in the next 5 years, we'll maintain our footprint. But what we have done is opened up kind of a partnerships arm to what we do. So if you're an organization or an individual who wishes to do work that's similar to what we're doing, or, if you would like to figure out how to get people to facilitate a dialogue program that you're wanting to do, or anything like that, we are very, very open to having conversations. So, we've had partners where we've done dialogue between Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth in Canada. We've done dialogue between journalists in Kazakhstan with journalists in the US. And so just to give you a couple of examples, but my point being that in partnership with others, we are really willing to go to different places. It's just that we, in our core programming, isn't going to be ready to expand too much over the next couple of years.
So we are running a little short on time here. Yep. The last question I would like to ask you, kind of a two-parter, is one, what ultimately would you as the CEO of Soliya love to be the product of Soliya's work? And then the second part of that question is, if people want to get involved, how can they get involved?
Good questions, both. So in some ways, I've kind of preempted this, and I've already spoken to this a little bit. I think if we can get to a place where the notion of having this engagement across line of difference and the byproduct of that, or the outcome of that, which is people learning to lean in to difference, if we can make sure that that is the norm everywhere, where young people, as they step off into the world of their own, are getting the possibility to be equipped to not just feel a sense of civic responsibility. This also goes back to that activation thing, right? A whole big element of what we do is that at the end of the program, the hope is that young people are coming out saying, hang on, I play a role in this, and I know how to play a role in this. If we can do those, the responsibility and the capability thing, and we can make it the norm, then I'll retire.
Okay, that's great. I think the last thought that I have is, this is a really great way to get students really very engaged. And that's something that is so important, just as a foundation of our society. I will remind people right now that it's voting time. So those that are not engaged tend not to vote. Those that are engaged do tend to vote. And that affects everybody. So the more engaged that we all are, the more that we can actually make decisions together, which is, a great thing.
Absolutely. And then, but also to say the vote is just one act. There's lots of work to be done. So we all need to commit to that. And so in terms of getting involved, look, the dialogue programs largely happen through institutional partnerships. So if you're affiliated to any kind of establishment of learning, tap into us. Facilitators, that's a wide open field. You can be from anywhere. The training happens online in the exchange portal. The cohorts are global, so we invite you to look up the training on our website. If you think of people who would be interested in supporting this work, please share. There's lots of ways to get involved and support.
So if there are people out there watching and thinking like, oh, well, I'm not really attached to an institution, would it be okay if they could just comment here, and then we could just forward that information to you or connect somehow?
Absolutely. We do have one dialogue program that can be done just as an individual. You don't have to be affiliated to an institution. So yes, by all means, just get in touch with us.
Very cool. Very cool. What's the name of that program?
That one is to be called Global Circles.
Global Circles. Okay, great. Well, Waidehi Gokhale, thank you very, very much for your time today. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. And I don't know if you have any final thoughts beyond what you've already said.
No, I think I've said enough. But thank you, Rico. And I do encourage people to look us up.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And until next time, this is Rico Manalo with All Aces on Air.
Bye.